the Devil's Classroom. At around 7 to 8 years ago, a few extra classrooms were constructed in my school because of sudden increase in the number of students. There were 4 classrooms that were constructed in the old school building. Classroom A to D. Classrooms A, B, and C were constructed without any problem, but it was the Classroom D that made its construction seem impossible. Some people who were involved in the construction got injuries, while some other people died of unknown causes. Moreover, a lot of strange incidents occurred during the process. The classroom construction somehow got finished. But even then, the mysterious incidents continued to occur even during the lectures. 1 week after the lectures had started, a D classroom teacher suffered a heart attack in the middle of the lecture. 1 week after that, the teacher passed away. Even the other teachers that taught after the incident ended up hospitalized for one reason or the other. After that, the people who used to say it was all a coincidence started believing that something was ominous about that classroom. Everyone was scared. Also, the classroom was allotted to new students every year. Every year, one student died from that group of new students. Because of that, the students started calling it the Devil's Classroom out of hate. Spring came and classrooms were reshuffled. Classroom's allotment was pasted on the notice board. I walked towards the notice board to take a look. In front of the notice board, I saw Yasuda-kun. He was staring at the notice board with a pale face. "What's the matter, Yasuda-kun?" I asked. He replied with a jittery voice, "The Devil's Classroom?" He pointed at his name on the notice board. In fact, his name was written under Classroom D's students. He was now a student of the Devil's Classroom. "You don't have to worry about it," I said to him while patting on his shoulder. "Wha-t-wha?" I looked at the notice board more carefully, and I saw that even my name was under Classroom D's students. "I'm also in Classroom D," I said. I had been thinking that I might get allotted to Class D because my luck is quite bad. "And it turned out the same way," he replied. "That's just your imagination. Even I, who thought that my luck was quite good, got allotted to Class D. We cannot blame everything on luck. Our allotment depended solely on probability. That's how it is," I stated my opinion. "Probability?" he wondered. "Conversely, if you think about it, then picking the unlucky number can also be possibly linked with a stronger luck," I said. "Nakagawa-san, you're a happy-go-lucky person. I'm the type of person who's always been getting the unlucky number right from my childhood. But I never thought that it could be because of having a stronger luck," he said. "That's why I sigh. I can understand it. Will hit me again this time. From the lot of Classroom's D sacrificial victims, I will be the one who'll get picked this time," he said. "You're overthinking it," I replied. "At the start of this year, I picked my fortune strip at the shrine. It read terrible. I picked another one again. It still read terrible. No matter how many times I picked a new one, but it read terrible only. This year, I'm the one who's going to die by the D-class curse," he said with a scared face. "They were all coincidences," I tried to reassure him. "You can say that because you are an easygoing person," he replied back to me. For some reason, I was now irritated with him. "Yeah, that's it. I have a good luck because I don't think about bad things," I shouted at him. "I've picked the unlucky number again." He repeated that again with his pale face. Then he ran outside the school building. This was the last time I saw Yasuda-kun. He got run over by a truck that day. When I received the message about Yasuda-kun's death, I was like, just as I thought. He was the unlucky one to be chosen this year. After that, just like humans do, people slowly forgot about Yasuda-kun's death, and then everything returned to normal life. Yes, I was also among those people. By the way, 3 days ago I was returning to home from school, and when I turned at the corner of the main street, I saw Yasuda-kun. He was carrying his school bag and was walking in front of me. He was Yasuda-kun for sure. I called Yasuda-kun and asked him to stop. But the moment I called him, he ran away at full speed. I for some reason chased him in a daze. Yes, that's right. I chased him. I ran towards the main street. "Watch out." I felt like I heard a voice from behind. And then the sound of car brakes echoed through my head. I see all the teachers that died due to Classroom D. They are teaching in the classroom. I look back and see that Yasuda-kun is sitting on the desk behind me and listening to the lectures. I look around at the classroom and see the man who worked and died in the construction process. I also see a lot of people who are clinging to the walls of this classroom. I see an old cemetery in the classroom. Today I saw that my desk was decorated with flowers. I did forget an important thing. Yasuda-kun never attended the D classroom. He died before it. This year's victim of D class was not him, but me. The Terrifying Tales of Graveyard Gary. I knew him before he was Graveyard Gary. Back when he was just Gary Cooper, a weirdo kid with a mullet. He was an awful boy even then. He arrived at our school sometime in grade 6. Straight away the kids hated him. And for good reason. Gary would light insects on fire and laugh as they burned. Then he would toss the charred carcasses at girls and laugh as they squealed and ran away. Like I said, he was a strange character. But it was in high school when he became Graveyard Gary. Gary was overeager, overweight, and overtly awkward. Needless to say, he couldn't charm his way out of a James Bond movie. Still, he was smart, no denying that, and he got good grades, unlike me. But still, I kinda liked him. Maybe because he was such an oddball, someone who desperately wanted to fit it but couldn't, no matter how hard he tried. Maybe because no matter how bad my life got, at least I wasn't as unpopular or weird as Graveyard Gary. I discovered his secret, if you can call it that, during lunch break. Back in grade 11, I believe. You see, I too was weird. Still am. But unlike Graveyard Gary, I kept my mouth shut. I wasn't popular by any stretch of the imagination, but I got by. Being good at sports, especially track and field, helped a lot. But I digress. Like I said, sometime during high school he became Graveyard Gary. I can't remember who came up with the name, but it stuck. Stuck like a fly in wet cement. Gary was the biggest pothead in school. And that's saying a lot. Believe me. In fact, I smoked my first joint with him. He approached me at the end of lunch break. His eyes were red and glossy, his hair disheveled and unkempt. I just rushed out from school band practice. I played bass in the school funk band. Duder, he called everyone that, this is what you need. He handed me a joint the size of a football. I took it and smoked it right then and there in the parking lot. I was curious. Lots of kids were using pot, so I figured I'd at least give it a try. I got so stoned I barely made it to class. Embarrassing story aside, everyone in class knew I was blazed, including Mrs. Stafford, my English teacher. Fortunately, I was saved by a snap assembly at the auditorium. I started getting high with Graveyard Gary every day at lunch. This is where my tale begins. Meaning, this is where things get creepy. Downright terrifying if you ask me. Graveyard Gary mostly smoked hash. He had plenty of it too. One gloomy fall afternoon, Gary led me out back behind St. Joseph's Cemetery, the oldest and creepiest cemetery in the lowly town of Gulp. The cemetery is next to a path leading to Main Street. Kids from both Blessed Mother of Mary High School and St. Joseph's Elementary School used the path, so there was plenty of traffic. We sat behind a large tombstone where nobody could see us. Something about this cemetery seemed wrong. I hated it. Too many dead souls in one place. No wonder everyone avoided it. Everyone, that is, except Graveyard Gary. Gary and I were sitting with our backs against an anonymous grave, gawking as a group of kids walked past, probably returning from the local pizza place. I remember being extremely self-conscious. What if they see me? Oh, they'd call me stupid names like Cemetery Sam or something worse. Not gonna lie, this thought terrified me almost as much as what comes next. Do you believe in ghosts? Gary casually asked. He was putting a small piece of hash onto the heater of a cigarette and then sticking the cigarette into the hole of an empty bottle with a hole cut into it. This is affectionately known as a bottle toke. BT for short. Yeah, welcome to Gulp. Before I could answer, he passed me the bottle and I inhaled the swirling smoke. Nope, I said amidst a coughing fit. Gary chuckled, his eyes big and red and round. Look over there, he pointed. I did. He was pointing to a tall gravestone with fancy calligraphy carved into it. Despite its grandiosity, the grave was grim and very old. It was super creepy, the kind of grave you'd expect a vampire to climb out of. Harold Pete Halliburton was the name on the grave, I remember. That name has stuck with me ever since. And for good reason. There, he snapped. You see it? I didn't. Nor did I care to. This place was weirding me out. The way the wind tickled the long grass poking out of the graves, making strange and inhumane noises. The way the graves seemed to all be pointing toward this particular tall and ominous tombstone. Plus, the feeling of being watched was as strong as the hash I was inhaling. Look harder, he said unkindly. I did. Squinting and straining to see something, mostly to amuse him, I saw something, a shimmering light like steam released from a kettle. Just a flicker, but it was enough to give me the heebie-jeebies. Before I could look away, the soil surrounding the tombstone moved. I rubbed my eyes, pretending not to notice the ghastly ghost stumbling out of the Halliburton grave, pretending not to smell the sweet stench of rotting flesh prickling at my nostrils. The corpse, a zombie ghost hybrid perhaps, started staggering toward us, scaring me half to death. Ah, you see him. He seemed proud. And stoned. I knew it. I always did. That's why I kept you around all this time. I raised my eyebrow and was about to intervene, like what's this kept you around nonsense? When he dropped another bomb. You're a sleether. Like me. He finished preparing another BT, then handed it to me. You just don't know it? I don't remember much of what happened next. But thankfully the Halliburton ghost disappeared. We chatted nonsensically, then we ambled towards the school good and high for our afternoon classes. I do recall trying my darndest to forget what I'd seen. I was stoned. I told myself the Halliburton ghost was my overactive, inebriated imagination. I told myself this, but I didn't believe it. Not for a second. Getting stoned at the cemetery became a ritual. One afternoon, a week or so later, Graveyard Gary seemed agitated, barely speaking a word. This was odd. You see, he didn't care enough to become upset. Even though he was an outcast, nothing seemed to bother him. I figured it was the drugs. We sat at our usual grave. I waited while Gary prepared the first round of BTs. As I was about to take a healthy-sized toke, something in the cemetery screamed. The sound ricocheted off the graves like a flat stone on a calm lake. The scream sent ripples down my spine. I could feel it in my teeth. Immediately, I was terrified. I hadn't heard nothing like it before. Not ever. It was extremely loud and piercing. Both near and far away at the same time, almost like it was a part of me. Reek. It happened again. The sound dripped from my forehead like cold sweat. I probably peed my pants. Even Gary seemed startled, so much so that he dropped his hash nuggets. He cursed while rubbing his large hands through the cold cemetery floor, searching for his precious hash. For a moment, the world went dark and still. I swear I could hear the cemetery's raspy breath rattling all around me. To my horror, the Halliburton ghost emerged, haggard and horrible. It groaned as it stood tall, too tall if you ask me. Then it flickered and returned to its grave. I sighed with great relief. Then something grabbed hold of me. Something big. It flashed before my eyes, sending a shock wave throughout my body and soul. It was awful. An abominable beast with maggots for eyeballs and thick matted fur. It stood erect, 10 feet tall at least, wearing mud-stained rags. It wasn't human, but it wasn't an animal. It was both. It came at me from behind, scraping my stomach with its long, jagged claws, cutting me open. The pain was egregious. Immediately, I started leaking blood by the barrelful. I freaked out, trying to get the monster off me, but it latched onto me. I fell to my knees, groaning in pain as the creature pounced. Again it shrieked. Reek. I panicked. My trembling hands were covered in gore and blood. My blood, which was leaking like a faucet. Relax, Gary said forcefully as he stood up. I gotta piss. Here seems fine. To my astonishment, as I lay leaking blood, being devoured by some unholy apparition, Gary pissed on the Halliburton grave. As he did, thunder rattled overhead and the sky grew menacingly dark. Lightning flashed. Looks like you're bleeding, Gary said without sympathy after he'd finished. He stuck his fatty finger deep inside my blood-guzzling wound. I hollered in grief. Everything went gray. For a moment I thought I was dead. Then my eyes shot open in a flash. Graveyard Gary was slapping my face, grinning like a lusty lounge lizard. I saw my reflection in his eyes and shuddered. Bleeding, I managed to say, my eyes pleading for help. Graveyard Gary crooked his huge head, brushing aside his brown bangs. I told you, he said as though talking to an imbecile. It looks like you're bleeding. Looks. By then he'd given up trying to find the lost hash. You're not bleeding. You just think you are. His smirk widened. Halliburton is a huckster. He's inside your head, gutting you like a pig. Gary started squealing and making pig noises. I leapt to my feet, panting and thrashing about. I couldn't shake off the ghost no matter how hard I tried. It was taking over me. My entire body felt gross. The creature was pulling at my spine, bending my bones. My hands and arms and legs were saturated in thick, gooey blood. My school uniform was ruined. How would I explain this to my father? Pain and panic infused me. I reached for my phone, then thought better of it, not wanting to ruin it with my splattering blood. Meanwhile, Graveyard Gary was laughing and rubbing his belly. For the first time that day, he seemed back to his old self. To my dismay, he produced a bag of candies from his jacket pocket and started shoving them into his pudgy face, chewing them like a hog. Watching him mock and belittle me was appalling. I hated him. Making matters worse, the Halliburton ghost started speaking. Its breath was rank and highly offensive, like sulfur mixed with saw sewage. Sam, it said, stay with us. You'll love it here. I promise. I flew 20 feet into the air, shrieking and crying and bleeding. That's when Graveyard Gary's face changed. It was an expression I'd never seen on his face, a mixture of concern and contempt. "Smarten up, Sam," he said after stuffing his soiled BT bottle into his backpack. "I told you. The ghost is screwing with you. That's all. The blood ain't real." He slapped me. Not hard, but hard enough to steal my dignity. Whatever was left of it. When I looked down, the blood was gone. Most of it anyway. And so was the Halliburton ghost. "Well," he said dramatically as though he'd been rehearsing this, "and the time has finally come, so he's gonna milk it for all it's worth. The blood isn't real." But his rubbery lips stretched into a grotesque grin, making him look like a full-fledged psychopath. "The ghosts are real." Ghosts? I didn't like how he'd pluralized the word. Graveyard Gary ignored me and peered across the endless row of tombstones, shaking his head. Getting realer every day. Stronger too. He helped me to my feet and we meandered back to class. I kept checking to see if the blood was still there. It wasn't, but that didn't reassure me. Nothing would after that. How could it? Just before we parted ways, he patted my shoulder, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Remember, Sam, you're a sleether." I'll never explore abandoned buildings again. We had a tradition, my friends and I, a kind of thrill-seeking ritual. On weekends, we'd explore abandoned places at night, documenting the crumbling remains of history. Most of the time it was just creaking wood, flaking paint, and the occasional scare from a rat or stray cat. Nothing supernatural. Nothing we couldn't laugh about later. But the last time we went exploring, it wasn't like the others. It started when Darren, the ringleader of our little group, revealed our destination that night. An old amusement park just off the beaten path. "I found it on some urbex forum," he said, grinning. "Totally untouched. No graffiti, no security. It's like it's frozen in time." The rest of us, Kate, Benny and I, were hesitant but intrigued. We piled into Darren's beat-up SUV and made our way there. The park was cloaked in mist, its faded neon signs barely visible in the moonlight. The metal gates were bent open as if something massive had forced its way in. Rusted rides loomed like skeletal monsters in the fog, their silence oppressive. At first, it was the usual fare, snapping pictures, laughing at Benny's attempts to climb the carousel. But then we noticed it, a shadow moving in the distance just beyond the Ferris wheel. At first, we thought it was an animal. Then it moved again, too tall, too deliberate to be anything but a person. "Let's get out of here," Kate whispered, her voice trembling. Darren scoffed, but even he looked uneasy. We decided to hide, thinking maybe it was security or some other explorers. The employee lounge was the closest building, so we ducked inside. It was dark, the air thick with rot and mildew. Kate found a light switch, and that's when we saw them, the bodies. They were arranged like a grotesque art exhibit. Some were seated at a table, playing cards, their decomposed hands holding disintegrated cards. Others were propped against the walls, dressed in decayed uniforms, their faces twisted in eternal screams. The stench hit us then, and Benny vomited in the corner. "We need to leave now," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The others nodded, their faces pale. We bolted out of the building, but that's when it appeared. The thing. It stood in the center of the midway, illuminated by a flickering street lamp. Its body was hunched, grotesque, its skin like cracked porcelain. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a swirling mass of darkness like the void itself. It let out a sound, a guttural, bone-chilling howl, that froze us in our tracks. Then it lunged. Chaos erupted. Darren shoved me toward the car, yelling, "Go!" before the creature grabbed him, its long clawed arms dragging him into the shadows. His screams cut off abruptly. Benny tried to fight it, swinging a piece of debris, but it swatted him aside like a toy. Kate and I ran together, but she tripped. I turned to help her, but the thing was already on her. She screamed as it dragged her away, her voice echoing in the night. I ran. The car was in sight. I fumbled with the keys, tears streaming down my face, and finally managed to start it. As I sped away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The creature stood in the road, watching, its head tilting as if in curiosity. The next day I went to the police. They didn't believe me at first, but when they checked the park, they found the bodies in the employee lounge. Darren, Kate, and Benny were nowhere to be found. Neither was the creature. Now every time I close my eyes, I see it, the swirling void where its face should be. And I know deep down it's still out there waiting for its next visitors. So there was this house back in my old hometown. Run down, caked in dirt, rust and usual grime. An abandoned craftsman-style house, supposedly part of an old ranch that sat just outside town. No one remembers the owners or even the name of the ranch it belonged to. The house was always covered in a thicket of decoration lights, webbed across every surface of the place like wild vines. It never mattered what time of day it was, the lights were always on, and so bright you could see the lights grazing the horizon of the sky as if it was fighting against the air, defending its right to exist. We were only ever able to see it. Anyone that tried to go out and find it rarely found success in their efforts. People would talk about a dirt road pasture with trees flanking either side and always seemed to get incredibly dark the further along you went. Others said they would get close enough to see a fence, rusted wire strewn around a rotted wooden post every few dozen feet or so from the next. Just never the house itself. Only the now dim glow of artificial lights left as any sign that there was anything there to begin with. Some days it wasn't even there, like it just got up and decided to not be there anymore. An active participant deciding who was allowed to see it. Despite how small our town was, there was a considerable amount of kids that would go missing every few years or so. Coincidentally, people would notice small changes to the house around the same time new notices would be posted. It was usually small stuff. A new window, an extended deck, or even new lights. They never looked new though, always the same well-worn look complete with dirt and all. There was one year in particular, a friend of mine from middle school went missing. He was a bit of an oddball, would take any bet possible. Sean was his name. I remember there being another kid I wasn't a huge fan of, Dylan. Kid was damn near obsessed with giving Sean the worst bets possible knowing he would guaranteed take them on. One of the worst ones being an incident where Sean was dared to jump off the roof of our school building. We didn't have a tall building or anything, it was just one of those one-story places that spanned across with maze-like halls and a small concrete courtyard. One side of the building dipped downwards, maybe a solid 45 degrees down and into a small grass field where the football players and coaches practiced and did morning workouts. At first everyone thought he had jumped right onto the concrete and just died on the spot. Turns out he landed on his back on the top of the hill in the back, rolled the rest of the way down right into the middle of a game of flag football. He came out with a concussion, and a custodian actually ended up getting fired for leaving out the ladders while the roof was under maintenance. Overall a pretty bad day. Sean came back to school eventually, and was right back to taking on dares. Dylan didn't let up one bit after the jumping debacle. Which leads into one of the more known disappearances around town. Usually it was something like a kid running away from home, or a teen going off to elope with an out-of-towner. In Sean's case, everyone saw him go into the behind school when Dylan dropped a crisp 50 in front of him. And no one ever saw him come out. A few months after Sean went missing, his body was discovered at the edge of the same tree line he was last seen entering. I remember the screams of the other kids to this day. It was like hundreds of boiling kettles going off at once. The tea leaving a rancid stench of copper and dried out leather in the air. Sean was mutilated nearly beyond recognition. No one even knew it was him until they got dental records. His body had been stretched out and flattened. His chest was made square and stiff. Ribs bent backwards and folded out straight to either side. His arms tucked to the side, with each rib bone poking subtly into what should have been his biceps. The forearms pointed down to the earth below, hands bent backwards with the fingers coiled backwards like tiny snail shells. He was in a sitting position, thighs out in front of him and bent at the knee. His feet were bent in semicircles, the splintered bones poking out the skin. He was reduced to a fucking chair. Furniture, an accent piece of what should have been a person. No one wanted to ever say it out loud, but we all blamed the house. Even though he shouldn't have even been looking in the direction of its usual spot in those woods. A person couldn't have done what was done to poor Sean, and it's not like we could even pin a person to begin with. The investigation went cold years ago with no suspects even being named. The house was the only one anyone in town could turn to for blame. It appeared on the hill outside school after his body was found, looking down on us all with a knowing and guilty bright gaze, taunting us. I haven't lived there in years, haven't even thought about the house until recently. Not until the damn thing started showing up outside my city. It knew I was starting to finally forget, it knew I was moving on and others were too. So it sits there, grabbing at my attention with its horrible lights. A gateway to hell waiting to ensnare my mind again. And it's working. Because I'm going to burn it to the ground, find it and make sure nothing but a memory of its ashes remain. It won't have me, not like it had Sean, not like it had everyone else. I refuse to feel guilty for an outcome I never expected. I won't let me continue to dwell on that single stupid fucking dare I made as a kid. I'll make it up to Sean one way or another.